Hello and welcome back to Tech Talk. Today we're going to be doing something kind of interesting. We are taking my old 7-year-old gaming PC and we're going to convert that to a home theater PC. And we're going to do it using this new very tiny case. It's an InWin CK709. And we're going to talk a little bit about what it takes to make a good home theater PC and about this build in particular. Now, just to let you know what's in this box, this is a PC I built about 6 years ago in 2017. It's a Ryzen 5 1500X on a MSI B350M Gaming Pro motherboard. It's got 8 gigs of RAM. It used to have 16, it has 8 now. And I've also swapped out, it used to have an RX 570 AMD graphics card. Now it has an NVIDIA GTX 950. I have been using this as a home theater PC, and it's been great. But there's a couple of things I don't like about it. First of all, it's in this great big case that has to go behind my TV stand where it's really hard to access. I wanted a case that was smaller that could fit in one of the openings in my TV stand so it's accessible from the front of the TV. That's number one. Second of all, this thing has 5 fans in it. Because it's got a discrete graphics card, it's got 2 case fans and in and out. It's got a GPU fan, a CPU fan, and a power supply fan. And so it's a little bit noisier than I'd like. It's fine for watching movies and listening to music. But the reality of it is, sometimes during quiet scenes, you can hear this thing running, and I don't like that. The second thing is because of the discrete GPU, it's probably using a bit more power than it needs. This is way overkill for what we use it for. We don't use our home theater PC for gaming at all. It's strictly used for streaming YouTube, Netflix, Prime Video. We do have a movie library of movies we've purchased that we have in here that we play. So we don't need a whole lot of computer, and this is just, it's kind of overkill. And I'm just not really into the way it is. But that having been said, I didn't want to have to build a whole new computer. Like, it just didn't make sense because this is going to be a fairly light usage PC. So what I thought I'd do is I'd buy this InWin case. It's a nice small case. It'll fit really well in my TV stand. And if you've ever shot for a home theater PC case, they're actually kind of hard to find. They're hard to find in any event, but they're particularly hard to find if you're looking for a small case for a micro-ATX motherboard. And InWin is one of very few companies that make a case this size. And just to give you an idea, this case is approximately 12 3/4 inches across the front. It's about 3 3/4 inches in height and about 11 inches deep. So really, it's just the motherboard and the compact power supply, and that's all there's room for. It's a very tight-fitting case, and it'll work great in my TV stand. It is a 9-liter case. InWin makes another series, the CJ series of cases, that are 8 liters. So you can take about a ½ inch off the depth and an inch off the measurement across the front, if I remember right. So they're a little bit smaller yet. Those ones weren't available to me when I bought mine off Amazon. This one was available for 2-day delivery or something like that. So I bought this one. It's a great size. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my B350M motherboard out of here. I'm taking the memory out of here. I've purchased an AMD Ryzen 5 4600G APU. So this is AMD's CPU with the graphics, integrated graphics built in. So that means I can get rid of that GTX 950 graphics card. And from Thermalright, I bought their AXP90 X47 47mm low profile CPU cooler. I've turned into a big Thermalright fan lately. I bought my first cooler from Thermalright a little while ago. I did a video on that. It's been a fantastic cooler. They're so cheap. This thing cost me 26 bucks. It looks like $1,000,000. I think it's going to work just fine in this home theater PC. So this combination, my motherboard with the new APU and the new cooler, is going to fit very nicely in this case. The other thing that I did, this PC, because it was more or less, spare parts kicking around for a home theater PC, it's got a 240 gigabyte M.2 drive for the operating system and two 2.5-inch SSDs for holding my movies and stuff. All those drives I'm just going to replace. I bought a single 2 terabyte Patriot P300 NVMe drive. It's an M.2. So that Patriot M.2 drive is going to mount to the motherboard, of course, and that'll be the only thing I need. 2 terabytes is plenty of storage for me. So when you think about how I'm going to adjust this, I'm losing my graphics card. I'm losing those 2.5-inch drives, going with the APU, the low profile cooler. So I don't need this great big case anymore. And the whole point of this is to give me a nice small home theater PC that I can fit inside my TV stand. And of course, the other thing is it's got to be cool and quiet. If you're watching a movie, the last thing you want is to hear your home theater PC humming away in the background. It's super irritating. And it's one of the things I didn't like about my current setup. And one of the reasons why I'm making these changes. So what I'm hoping for is that when this is all done, I'll be able to run these fans on a reduced profile such that I really won't hear this case at all. Besides the CPU fan, there is an 80 millimeter exhaust fan in the front of this case, and then of course there's a fan for the power supply. So hopefully we'll be able to turn all that down so it's virtually silent. And that brings me to one of the issues with this case that does kind of bug me. Um, as I mentioned, it's hard to find a small home theater PC case for micro-ATX motherboard. And one of the things that bugs me is about this one, and we're going to put up a picture of what this case looks like, because I've already made a modification to this case, so I can't show you the way it came. But we'll put up a picture here as to what it looks like. And the problem is on top, what you see is right over your motherboard, exactly where your CPU and CPU cooler would go, is this large metal tray. And that metal tray is meant to hold an optical drive and a 2.5-inch or 3.5-inch hard drive or SSD. Now, it's a little irritating because this is 2024 and most people aren't using optical drives and 2.5 or 3.5-inch drives. We have these wonderful M.2 drives that fit right on your motherboard. If you need more of them, you can get a PCIe adapter for like 20 bucks that'll hold more drives. I don't really think this tray is something a lot of people are going to want to see in a home theater PC. And the problem is because it mounts right over top of your CPU area, it limits your cooler height to 47 millimeters. Now, the cooler I bought is exactly 47 millimeters. And I know from builds I've seen with this case that that's going to put the cooler right up against the bottom of that metal tray. Now, it's true the metal tray is perforated, it's designed to let airflow through, but the metal that is there right above your cooler, it is going to restrict airflow, and the airflow that does go into your cooler is going to be more turbulent. So that's going to reduce the efficiency of your CPU cooler. Now, in a home theater PC, you're saying, well, the use isn't going to be that strong. It's not going to generate that much heat. But the thing is, because you want your home theater PC quiet, you want to run those fans as slowly as you can. And so anything that disrupts the airflow and limits the efficiency of the CPU cooler isn't good. So here's what I did. And I've seen different people do different things. The challenge that you have with that, so those two rails mount to the optical drive mount, which is part of the front wall of the case. So the problem is if you just take it out and leave it out, you've got no way to effectively mount this front panel. There's no way it'll clip in properly. You lose that. So what I did was I simply took this metal portion for the optical drive where it mounts to the front, and I cut those rails off that create that whole big piece of metal that covers over your cooler. Then I took that, I slipped it in. There's two ears on the front of the case with two pivot points where you can put in screws to mount it. And then I just fastened the whole thing with JB weld around the perimeter. So the two mounting ears and the bottom portion, I JB welded to the front panel. The last thing I did was I took these two pieces of sheet metal that I cut out, just two small ones to use as gussets, JB welded that to the front. This is in there so strong, it's probably stronger than the original case. The important thing about doing that, when you adhere all this in, it's important that this front wall remains absolutely straight. So if you've got this case or a case like it, and you want to do the same thing, I used quick setting JB welds. You've only got a few minutes before it sets up. So I quickly put everything together with a JB weld, and then I put a ruler across the front of it so I could make sure this wall was perfectly straight. If it's out even a couple of millimeters, you're going to have a hard time getting this plastic piece to clip back in. You can adjust some of the mounting points, but when you put it all back together, it's not going to look right. So in order for all your panels to line up nicely, you need to make sure that when that glue sets, this wall is nice and straight. The other thing you can do is you can put it all together, you can JB weld it in, and then gently put the front on, put the lid on, and make sure everything fits well. Just don't glue all those pieces on. For me, the better thing is take a ruler as a straight edge, put it along the front, make sure it's straight, hold it there while it sets. It sets very quickly in just a few minutes. And now what I've got is I've got a fantastic case that's basically just all open. So my CPU cooler is going to sit right about here where it's going to draw all the air in the world. And the way this case works is basically it takes air in through this grill in the back, which is right over your I/O ports. The air is going to flow right over your CPU cooler, and it goes out this front exhaust fan, and it also goes out through the PSU fan here on the side. So this fan and this fan are drawing air out, and it's coming in right over top of your motherboard and cooler. So I think for home theater use, this case is actually designed really, really smartly. It's quite small. It fits a micro-ATX motherboard. The cooling should be fine, especially if you make this modification where you're pulling these rear rails out because you don't need it for mounting drives. So hang out with me. I'm going to put this together. We're going to look at the cable mounting because on such a small case, cable mounting is going to be an issue. I'm going to show you what the finished product looks like, and then I'll give you my thoughts on what I think of this case, and you'll be able to see kind of how all this goes together after coming out of this bad boy here. I'll give you just a couple of tips on working with CPUs and coolers that I found handy over the years. So I've taken my B350M Gaming Pro motherboard out of my old PC, and I'm getting ready to put the new chip and cooler in it. Now there's a couple of things about doing this that's really important. The first is when you're unscrewing your cooler, because this hold down for the cooler is under quite a bit of tension, it's important you don't just crank off one screw, crank off the other screw, crank off the third. Whether you're putting a cooler on or taking it off, you should always do like you do for lug nuts on a car. Do it a little bit at a time, alternating the screws in kind of a star pattern. So, you start over here on the upper right, do a few turns, go bottom left, do a few turns, upper left, do a few turns, bottom right, do a few turns. And that way what you're doing is you're easing up the pressure gradually on all the feet so that you don't end up with 3 feet undone and then one taking all that pressure where you could damage the cooler, damage the CPU socket, damage the motherboard, whatever. You don't want a huge differential in pressure on each corner. The other thing is once you've got these things off, with AMD motherboards, as you're probably aware, it's a pin grid array. So what you've got is a bunch of pins on the CPU that are locked into the socket. Now, that's all well and good, but the problem comes up in that sometimes if you just go ahead and try to yank the cooler off, the pins can't hold the CPU into the socket, and the CPU comes with it. And then you got a problem because you got a freestanding CPU that is now glued to your cooler. So what I always like to do is just give it a little bit of a wiggle as you pull it off. And it should come off cleanly. Now this one was hard because these screws stay down, and you saw it really didn't take a whole lot to come off because that's the factory coolant. But most coolers, when you take the screws out, they'll clear the board. And if you just give it a slight rock back and forth as you apply pressure, it'll eventually loosen. And just very slowly increase the pull upward as you're rocking it back and forth. And that way, ideally, what will happen is exactly what happens here, which is that my cooler's come off. It's come off nice and cleanly. My CPU is still left behind to take out. Unfortunately, because that was a cooler that had thermal paste applied from the factory, I don't have a big thermal paste mess to clean up. So I am going to clean up the little bit that's there. We're going to put the new chip in. We're going to put the new cooler on. We're going to drop it in that nice little case. So I'm going to get ready to mount my motherboard to my cooler. I've got my pea-sized blob of thermal paste there. Everybody's got a different idea on how to do thermal paste. Some like to do the grain of rice, some like to do the pea-sized blob, some like to spread. I'm a blob guy. I know that when I've seen tests of thermal paste application, what works, they all pretty much work the same. The only thing that doesn't work well is using way too little or way too much. As long as you've got reasonable size on there, you don't have to worry about technique too much. It all works. What I do is the pea-sized blob, and normally you're putting a cooler down on top like this, so I just give it a little bit of a twist as it goes down, and I put pressure on it to just kind of spread out the paste. It's always worked well for me. This is a little different. This cooler, to mount it, I actually have to turn the motherboard upside down and put it on top of the cooler, so that's going to be a little bit different, but we're going to go ahead and do that now. So there's a couple of things that I like to do when assembling a new case before I get too excited about putting things together. The first is I take the package of screws I have, and usually there's all kinds of different screws, and make sure I know exactly which screw fits this motherboard standoffs. Because one thing you might be surprised by is that it's not the same in all cases. They're often quite different. Sometimes it's a coarse through screw, sometimes it's a fine threaded screw. But I just like to take a couple of standoffs, make sure I understand exactly which screw is going in there. You'd be surprised how easy it is to get the wrong screw going, and suddenly you've got it cross-threaded and you've made yourself a mess. The other thing I do is I like to take my motherboard and I hold it over, the case. And what I'm doing here is on the motherboard, I've counted exactly how many screw holes I have. So in this one, I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And I make sure I'm lining it up with exactly what's in the case so that I know I have exactly the number of standoffs that I need. Because I'll tell you what I did once. Once I got all excited, I got a new case. It was a micro-ATX case, all the standoffs are in. I thought, perfect, I'm going to mount my motherboard. I mounted the motherboard. I spent the next day trying to figure out why the darn thing wouldn't boot. Couldn't get it to boot at all. It was frustrating the hell out of me. And finally, I tore the whole case apart. And it was then that I realized the manufacturer had an extra standoff right in the middle of my motherboard. So when I mounted it, I bolted down all the screws onto the standoffs, but that one standoff was actually touching one of the metal contacts on the back of the board and shorting it out. So it wouldn't boot because it kept shorting out. Now the good news is I never destroyed the motherboard because that could be fatal. In fact, this is the motherboard that happened to, and here it is 6 years later, I'm still using it. But as a tip, if you want to save yourself some headaches, count your holes, count your standoffs, make sure they're the same number, make sure they're in the right place, and if you want to be even extra careful, line up 6 screws, because I know I have 6 holes, 6 standoffs, 6 screws. That way I know the whole thing has gone together the way it should. So before you get too excited, just make sure everything's lining up. You got no extra standoffs in your case. It's really important for making sure your computer boots right the first time. Okay, so I've been working on this for some time, and I'm pretty much ready to just do my cleanup and then see if it'll fire up. Now, you may be wondering why I didn't build this on a box and test it out first, and it's quite simple. This is a motherboard I've had for years. I know it works. I recently updated the BIOS. I've been using it for about a week since then. I know it works. Pretty sure I'm not going to have an issue with this because it's so simple and straightforward. But I thought I'd share with you exactly what this looks like at the end, and I'm actually really surprised. First of all, when you mount the motherboard in the case, it gives it a little extra rigidity, which is nice. Again, once you get the lid on it, it doesn't matter. It's a very tight fit. It's a tight fit with my little MATX motherboard, but there's a bit of space before the front wall of the chassis, and there's a bit of space in the front right corner, and it's just enough to help you basically run your wires around the perimeter. So I'll show you what that looks like. Basically, this is my finished setup right here. So as you can see, I've got the power supply cables coming out, going to the 24-pin connector. I've got the CPU connector going over here. The front headers come back. And what I've done is I've used zip ties here, and I put a little sticky mount on this side. I have these little electrical tie downs. They've got 3M adhesive on them, and they've also got holes where you can put screws in. I use them around the house for tying back cables in different places, but they work great on PC cases. I just stuck one to the side of the case, ran the cables over top, put a zip tie through, and boom, you're done. So as you can see, I think, I wasn't counting on this having pretty cabling because there's no clear panel or anything. There's no need. But I still think it came out pretty clean and nice. And as you can see, if I have to make changes, work on anything, it's absolutely dead simple. So I think that's a pretty good outcome. I've got the front cover back on. I'm going to put the top on the case. Then we're going to see if she boots up. So I just wanted to do a little bit of a follow-up to this video. I've had a chance to use this case and this PC a little bit now. And I wanted to give you my thoughts on this InWin CK709 case. You've seen what I did to build it. You've seen what the build looks like. This is actually a brilliant case with a single caveat. The modification I made getting rid of those rails for the 2.5-inch and 3.5-inch drives in the optical drive turned this into a fantastic little home theater box. The CPU with the cooler I've got on it stays very cool. It idles at about 30 degrees or 29 degrees. It's never gotten over 50. I have no cooling problems. I think the layout of the case is nice. My micro-ATX motherboard fits in really snugly side to side. Then in the front, there's just a couple of inches or a few inches where you can run all your cables along the front. So I think in terms of cable routing, it's actually not bad. The only issue I have with it, really... Oh, and by the way, the power supply was something I wondered about, because the power supply comes with the case, so you've paid for it. And I was really worried that the power supply was going to be impossibly loud. It's actually not. In a quiet room, if I kind of put my ear up to this and have it 5 or 6 inches away, what I hear mostly is just the air flowing through the case. I don't really hear fan noise. I don't really hear anything else. I just hear that gentle, movement of air. I've got the front fan running at a fixed 50%. It is a 4-pin fan, which is nice. So it's got pulse width modulation for controlling the speed. So you can set the speed on this thing very finely. You could run it way down at probably 10 or 15 or 20%, and it'll run just fine. I keep it running at 50 just steadily because I find that's comfortable for me. But if I wanted to, I could turn it down further. And so what I found is that as soon as I step back, I can't really hear the case so much anymore. And inside my TV stand, I can't hear it at all. So if you want to build a home theater PC like this, I would recommend this case. But here's my request to InWin. Don't remanufacture these so you have the option of taking that tray out that holds the drives. Because so many people now are going to want to do what I did, and that is build a very simple computer with an APU, integrated graphics, and an M.2 drive or a couple of M.2 drives. They're not going to want, the externally attached SATA drive. They're not going to want the optical drive. They're not going to want all that stuff. And that tray really does interfere with the cooling. It does interfere with the cooler height you can use. Like by taking that tray out, if I wanted, I could have got a significantly taller cooler than the one I did. And I think, I didn't check it, but I think it would fit a stock AMD cooler. At least the stealth cooler, if nothing else. So that's my only bugaboo. I shouldn't have to, get out my Dremel tool, cut the tray apart, JB weld it into the front of the case to make that happen. There should be an adapter that you can fit in here that will work to convert this to a case that has no other drives outside of an M.2 drive. Outside of that, I recommend the case. I think the power supply is reasonable. It's not like, 80 plus gold or anything. It's just a very basic power supply, but it's quiet, which is the key. It's well designed, and it's so compact. This is not a big case. And so for a home theater PC, I think this is perfect. So if you're willing to do a little bit of work modifying a case, or if you need the tray in there for an optical drive and other drives, I really recommend this. I think it's a good little unit. I'm pretty happy with the purchase. Again, they have a CJ series. This is a 9-liter case. The CJ series is 8 liters, so it's a little bit smaller. But yeah, go and check one out. I paid $155 Canadian, again, including the power supply. I think that's a good deal. So I've got no headaches recommending this.